Today we'll be talking about the uniform and equipment of a standard infantryman serving with the 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. The 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne, was initially formed at Camp Toccoa, Georgia in 1942. They arrived in England in September 1943, carrying out extensive training ready for the invasion of mainland Europe. Stationed around various villages in Wiltshire, it wasn't until a few days prior to D-Day that the 2nd Battalion were moved down to RAF Upottery in Devon. RAF Upottery was the home of the 439th Troop Carrier Group, and it was aboard their C-47 aircraft the paratroopers would fly into battle on the night of the 5th of June 1944. They were to drop behind the invasion beach Utah to secure the 4 causeway exits as part of Operation Albany. So what we'll do first is we'll start off at the top of the mannequin with the helmet. As you can see, it looks like an M1 steel helmet, but it's actually an M2 paratrooper version. Based on the M1 style, it had a few modifications to make it more comfortable for paratroopers. As you can see, it has the A yokes, which attached to a leather chin cup, which secured it underneath the paratrooper's chin, so that when they jump out of the aircraft, it stays secure. The other chin strap, obviously with normal M1 helmets, it's sewn directly onto the bail. However, with the paratrooper ones, there is an extra popper, again securing it to the inside of the liner. With the paratrooper helmets, they had cork texturing on them, olive drab paint, and a lot of the paratroopers would put scrim on them to give them extra camouflage whilst they were in combat. And particularly with the 506th, they would use the spade insignia. Every parachute infantry regiment that jumped had their own personal insignia, so it was easing identification between troopers when they're on the ground. And then depending on which battalion you served with, depends on where the marks would go around the helmet. Moving down to the uniform itself, as you can see, the standard issue uniform for paratroopers on D-Day, American paratroopers, was the M1942 jump uniform or jump suit. It was originally designed in the early 1940s. The original designs didn't have reinforcements. What they found is when they jumped into Africa, these areas around the edges of the pockets and on the elbows and on the knees would wear out and give way. So prior to D-Day, a lot of riggers and stuff would put in extra reinforcements on these pockets, which would obviously reinforce the pressures that the pockets and knees and elbows were going through during a parachute jump. Underneath, just a standard wool shirt, M37 wool shirt. Obviously, we know them now as mustards. That was a term that was brought up after the war, but a reenactorism is that they are called mustards. So the standard jacket itself, 4 pockets on the front. One thing that the 2nd Battalion 506th would do, certain members would add extra pockets to the arms, back of the jackets and stuff. Not all of them, it was very hit and miss. You can see in certain photos. This one has had them attached to the arms. One thing that is to note as well, you can see it's a darker colour. So if you are preparing one of the uniforms for yourself for reenactment, one thing you should do is what they call CC2 it. So CC2 was a chemical impregnate that was designed to stop from gas attacks and gas getting in through the uniform. Prior to the jump, all uniforms, even those that were landing on shore, would have their uniforms dunked in large barrels full of this chemical, and it would darken the uniform and give it a waxy texture. With the modern ones, obviously you can't use CC2 because it causes all sorts of nasty illnesses and stuff. So there's various methods that you can do. On this one, we used wax, waterproofing wax, and you cover it in. then you soak it in with a hairdryer or something warm, which will soak it up. You can use other methods such as decking oil, which is a lot easier. However, it is definitely something that you need to do if you want to portray a paratrooper jumping in on D-Day or after serving in Normandy. Right, moving on to the equipment that a paratrooper would use. Obviously, this is set up for a standard infantryman serving within one of the rifle platoons. We'll start from the top. So again, standard M36 suspenders, which is part of the webbing system, which attach to the pistol belt along here. Again, Garand belts weren't very popular during Normandy, so they would have the pistol belt with all the attachments to it. So you've got the M36 suspenders, padding for the shoulders, obviously it takes off some of the pressure on the shoulders. Moving down, the paratrooper first aid kit, you would normally see a couple of these attached to uniforms. This one, obviously, they would tie them in different places on the uniform. Most commonly would be around the webbing. Easy accessible, things like this. Coming across here, we've got the gas brassard. One thing to remember with reenactment and just in general, no arm flag. 101st Airborne were not issued arm flags in Normandy. Only the 82nd wore them. So what they had, every trooper would be issued a gas brassard. Again, what would happen is it would change colour if there was gas detected. These wouldn't last very long. They're only card material. So you see lots of photos of them after a few days fighting in Normandy. They're just ripped apart and shredded. But obviously this is set up so it's to represent a paratrooper that's just landed in Normandy. Moving along, we've got the paratrooper's wrist compass. This was issued to most soldiers, if not all of them. They would be attached in various places, obviously the wrist, going by the name. So you see photos of them wearing them on the wrists, attached through here, attached on the webbing. Some are even attached to the paratrooper boots. I've got mine set up there. Now we go down to the cartridge belt. So the cartridge belt, simple application of holding more and extra ammo. It's got 6 pouches, which carries the clips for the M1 Garand, which we'll go on to later. Now, rigger pouches. These were designed by parachute riggers and things, the people in those sort of roles on the airfields and within the units. They would make them out of canvas material, very similar to the reinforcements that you see on the uniforms. These are the smaller type, the more standard type, so they would hold 4 rounds, or 4 clips, sorry, of M1 Garand ammo. And you see anywhere between 2 to 4 on webbing equipment, depending on what space that trooper had. Obviously, role dependent would depend on how much equipment they're holding. So coming to the back of the mannequin, at the very top, we have the Musette pack, which attaches to the D-loops on the M36 suspenders. Obviously, this wouldn't have been able to be worn during a jump because you'd have the T5 parachute on the back. So this would disconnect, be flipped over the front. When the paratrooper lands, takes off his chute and his May West, this would then be flipped over to the back, and it can be attached by extra straps underneath the arms. Not everyone did this, but obviously it keeps it more secure. The thing that is missing on this paratrooper is the drop rope. So every paratrooper was issued with a drop rope. You might see them long bits of white rope. They were designed to help them get down from trees and things like this. They would keep them for only a few days in Normandy before they would then start ditching them for other equipment. On this side, we've got the M1910 entrenching tool. Every paratrooper would have been issued an entrenching tool. Some were issued the M43 folding shovel type. This one is the fixed handle one. What they did is they used to cut them down because obviously the full length ones would cause a lot of problems. So you see lots of paratroopers with them cut down. Moving around here is the standard issue water bottle. Here we have the first aid pouch, which would hold a Carlisle packet in with first aid supplies, which we'll go through later. Going back to the standard infantryman role, you've got the M1 Garand bayonet, which you can see there. Okay, moving down to the trousers of the M42 jumpsuit. These would be held up by a trouser belt as well as trouser suspenders, which was standard issue across the US Army. Come down to the leg ties. These were added during the reinforcement process, which you can see the reinforcements on the pockets here. One thing to take note is that the 101st had these type, which is OD3 in colour, and the 82nd wore the darker green type, which is very similar to the reinforcements, which is OD7. So you can tell this is 101st by those leg ties. Also note for reenactors out there, make sure your pockets are full. Even if you don't have anything to put in them, paratroopers would have the pockets stacked full of kit and supplies and anything that they could take in with them. So even if you can't put supplies and stuff in, pad them out. Here you can see the reinforcements for the knees, which I mentioned earlier. And then attached to this paratrooper's calf, which would also overlap at the boots, which I'll come to in a minute, is the M3 fighting knife and the leather sheath. The fighting knife was issued to paratroopers and other members of the US Army as a standard fighting knife. They weren't really designed for utility use. These were more for hand-to-hand combat. These were attached, the sheaths were attached by a leather strap around the bottom and whatever they could find to attach it to the top of the leg. This one's obviously got a leather strap. There was bootlaces used. Most common were the white cot straps, which they used for their cot beds. They're quite prominently seen within the 101st being used. But whatever method you can use, that's how it attaches. Coming down to the boots now, these are the true mark of a paratrooper. They were very, very proud of these. It showed their elite status, that they were airborne trained. Obviously, they were high-legged to give them support around their ankles. One thing to note is the heel is actually cut at 45 degrees, which is done on purpose. And this was so if they snagged a riser during their parachute drop, it would just fall out, which is why it's designed that way. Now, this one, they were laced with, you see very different types of lacing. You see leather laces, you see the yellow and brown laces. I've used paracord on these ones, which again was used. And you see very different methods of how to lace them. Some very, very peculiar designs. This one has a Hawkins mine attached to it via a parachute first aid pack. Again, they would attach, like I said earlier, the wrist compass. That would sometimes be attached to them. This one, obviously designed with the Hawkins mine, anti-personnel, anti-vehicle mine, and yes, tied on using a parachute first aid pack. They again would use different types of straps to attach them to, so that's how that one is. Okay, and we get to, being that this is a standard infantryman's kit, we get to the main part, which is the service rifle. In this case, the M1 Garand. Obviously, depending on what role that you portray or that you took part in the platoon, would depend on what rifle or submachine gun that you would be issued. In this case, it would have been the M1 Garand. About 5.4 million of these were built and made, and these were the standard issue rifle to the American Army during World War II. It fired a 30-06 round, which we have here, and these you'd have 8 in a clip. Pull it back, put the clip in, let go, and it would pack a punch. General Patton said that this was one of the greatest battle implements ever made, and it was in use all the way through Korea, saw limited use in Vietnam, and even some insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan were using these. So they have been tried and they have been tested. Semi-automatic, as I said, 8 rounds, so you could fire off a few rounds. It was a lot rapid than the bolt-action rifles that they were up against, such as the Japanese rifles and the German rifles. So it was quite a popular weapon. The 506th had been promised that they would be in battle for just 3 days, but they did not return to England for 33 days. Of about 2,000 men who jumped into France from the 506th, 231 were killed in action, 183 were missing or POWs, and 569 were wounded, about 50% of casualties for the Normandy campaign. The regiment would go on to take part in Operation Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge, and other actions before the war ended with the 506th in Austria. Easy Company of the 506th PIR were immortalised in the HBO 10-part series Band of Brothers, which first aired in 2001. We thank you for taking your time to view this video. If you have any questions or have suggestions for further content on our YouTube channel, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to like and share. You can find the items featured in this video plus much more on our website, which is www.epicmilitaria.com.